Want to expand the influence of design? Pragmatic Institute offers interactive, actionable courses for designers who are looking to contribute more strategically in their organizations. Explore our offerings such as business strategy and design, and influence through storytelling at pragmaticinstitute.com/design.
Hello, and welcome to Design Chats, a podcast from Pragmatic Institute where we sit down with design leaders, practitioners, and alumni to discuss how to grow the strategic impact of design. I am Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing and Product Strategy at Pragmatic Institute, and today I'm extremely excited to have with us Venessa Bennett, Head of UX at Cazoo. Hello, Venessa. Welcome.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. All right. Today, we're going to talk about a whole lot of things, particularly I think about making sure that UX and UX research really has the right voice within inside a company. And we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion. But to help everybody understand a little bit more about you, Venessa, give us sort of your background, how you got into design and why you're so passionate about what you do.
Oh, okay. So I have a very relatively boring story. It's not an interesting story about how I got into design. So when I was a teenager, quite a few years ago, just kind of realized that I was really passionate about it's a bit of a throwback, but using Microsoft Word, and really like when I was doing my dissertations and my coursework, spent a lot of time on the layout and less time on the content. My dad was just kind of like, oh, you're kind of into this. Looks like you really like this kind of stuff. How about graphic design? And looking into that. So essentially I did a BTEC. So that's kind of UK course at college, which I think you call it something else in the US. But essentially at college, I did a 2-year course in graphic design. And then I went to university at University of Westminster and studied graphic information design. And then I've kind of been in design ever since then, basically, and really evolved and ran with the time. So went from kind of graphic design into what you would call digital design, which then evolved to UX UI, which has now evolved to product design. So I've had a long kind of career in design, worked my way up from being a junior all the way up to where I am today, which is like head of UX. So that's a brief overview of my journey.
Not boring at all. That's great. And I think it shows just like how early, and I hear this a lot when I talk to people, how early they found their passion for design, and also just what a broad category design is. You talked about lots of different ways you've studied it and parts that you've done. It's one of the things I think that makes it interesting. There's so many different things to uncover. So when we talk about design and UX, I think one of the things that you're passionate about, that we're passionate about, is sort of elevating the voice at the table of design, making sure that the impact of design is really heard and seen. And I know you've got a great perspective on this. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about both why they think that's so important and some of the struggles that you see companies and teams go through today.
Yeah, so I think it's really key. Essentially, I think a lot of people who are in the industry kind of know that when it comes to cuts and layoffs, kind of design is looked at as probably marketing and then design. So design traditionally has been seen as a nice to have. Mm-hmm. So I think for designers to have a lot more relevance and to be seen as a must have rather than a nice to have, we need to kind of have a seat at that table, but we also need to have something to say. And I think a lot of businesses, what they care about now, especially now, is the bottom line, profitability, and how are we going to meet those kind of company goals. So I think as a designer, designers really need to have that commercial kind of mindset and make sure that whatever we're doing, however we're designing, we can articulate how that ladders up to those business kind of goals. And I think the second part of it is, how do we collaborate? So I think as a designer, we have a knack. And if you look at that design process, it's really about collaboration and solving problems. And a designer has that skill that they could be that thread as you go through that kind of product design lifecycle or product development lifecycle. They could be that thread that kind of runs through it. So they are that one person that's at the beginning of that kind of coming up with a concept, coming up with an idea, validating that, and then seeing it right through to delivery, right? So designers have that knack and that natural skill to bring people together and bring people in the room essentially and problem solve. So we have that unique view where we can actually look at the business side of things and how what we're creating ladders up to the business, but also that customer user view, right? So is this working for our users? Is this working for our customers? Because oftentimes you've got the business and product people looking at kind of the commercial aspect of it and figures and spreadsheets. But actually, what does that look like in reality? How does that work for our users? And I think designers have that unique kind of perspective that they're able to kind of do that. And I think especially as the industry evolves, it's going to be called for design and designers to be a lot more commercial and to be able to constantly bring that customer lens to a lot of these kind of business goals and business outcomes.
That's great. And I think what's really interesting there is we talk about two different things that designers need to do. One really builds on sort of the core strengths and some of those innate talents that makes designers really good. And the other is equally important, but sometimes it's a little more foreign to their sort of skill set and their piece. And so let's talk first about sort of the innate talents, the things that like think about your own superpowers and how you can leverage those to help internally in the organization. And you talked about the user lens. And I also think storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Those kind of go hand in hand, is a great place to recognize as designers, we've got skills and talents, and to really use that with intention internally to move our plans and views forward.
Yeah, because I think the key thing is storytelling. People respond to stories. They don't respond necessarily to spreadsheets or figures, but we as designers have an innate skill to tell stories. So in these business environments, we can work out how can we articulate great storytelling that talks about the customer and that customer story and how customers are kind of feeling, but also being able to get buy-in. When we talk about getting buy-in for things that we design, how can we kind of tell those stories that really are compelling stories for two stakeholders and also engineers or whoever's in your team? And I think designers too often don't really kind of leverage that skill of storytelling, which is a really powerful skill where we can kind of look at something, simplify it, and tell a really good, compelling story that will be engaging to not only the user, but also their peers as well.
It's one of the things we teach, right? Is how to like kind of pinpoint and clarify just the scaffolding of the story of what you're trying to accomplish so you can build that great narrative around it. When you're managing your team, when you're working with designers who work for you, how do you help them build that storytelling muscle, not just to do better stories, but to remember to use it?
Great question. It's a kind of an internal struggle with my team. But I think one of the things that I really encourage my team is to have a view. Have a view on what you think good design is, especially if you want to go into that leadership kind of areas. Really have a view of what is good design and being able to articulate that. But I think also with the environment that they're in, so they're in a team environment working with PMs, working with engineers, there's probably some stories that they can tell that they can start articulating. So it could be, for example, I've got one person in my team who's really great at stakeholder management, stakeholder comms and workshops. So that's an interesting story to tell that you can actually talk to other designers who are less seasoned in workshops and stakeholder comms. So it's really like finding the joy in the everyday, the mundane, and being able to almost articulate that and turn that into a story. I think what I tell my team quite often is there's different ways of telling stories. So it could be the output of your story could be a workshop, for instance, or maybe it's a presentation, or maybe it's a blog post. I think there's different ways that we could start telling stories. But I think the key thing for design is to make sure that we're telling these stories to teach other people within our community and help build that community. Because I think every designer has different kind of strengths and superpowers that you touched on earlier. It's like, how can we actually share that knowledge between us and evangelize for design to make the design practice actually stronger within an organization?
And I think that that's super good too, because like, I think sometimes like the person who's really good at stakeholder management, you and I can be like, wow, that is special. Lots of people aren't. But I think sometimes when you're the person who is really good at something, it no longer seems like you're like, oh, everyone can probably do that. Like you forget,
Yeah.
right? Like it's so natural to you and so straightforward to you that sometimes you don't step back and go, oh, that is unique, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that's where I think I come in.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
I see it as my job to be like, you've got a talent here and
Yep.
kind of like
Yep.
pull it out slowly but surely and say, essentially, you've got a talent that you can kind of sell. You can market, you can sell it. And this is what makes you special as a designer. I think as designers kind of go through their career, you kind of need to work out how you can brand yourself and what makes you special and unique as a designer over another designer. Why would I hire you? Why would I put you in
Mm-hmm.
this team? And designers who know what their superpowers are, know how to brand and market them, they are seriously powerful designers. So I think that's where I come in, and my job is as a design leader that has a team is to really pull out those superpowers, understand how we can leverage them throughout the team and share that knowledge and essentially build like a balanced team that's successful. So that's what I see with those kind of superpowers.
I would think as a leader too, that's probably both. I think it's wonderful that you recognize that is what your job is to help your team realize their talents and foster that. And I think that your team is fortunate to have someone who recognizes that and who cares, right? Because it is a gift to give someone to help them see their strengths. Because again, it's so often much easier to focus on focus on your falls and your faults. So I think that's great. Thinking about my own team, I'm like, I'm gonna have to do that a little bit more.
I think every designer has probably had a bad manager at
Yeah, yeah.
some point. So I think my management style is trying to not be a bad manager. But also, I think it's because designers are pretty bad at thinking about their career. I think it's because we're in the creative industry and we're lucky to enjoy what we do. So then
Mm-hmm.
we don't think almost about that long term. So with my team, again, I'm always trying to ladder up the now and talk about the now in the context of their future and that career. So talking about it as a career rather than your job, where you are now, and what you're kind of experiencing now, actually giving that context, which I think is also a key thing in that career development kind of path.
Yes. And I think the first step in being a good manager is to not want to be a bad manager. Right? Was that we've all had them. All right. So I think that's where being to help you succeed, you lean into your strengths. But I think there is one area that is sometimes harder for designers, right? And that is laddering our work to the company goals. And often it's the language difference, right? It's how we talk about what we're doing versus how they're talking about their goals and making sure that we kind of mirror their language. I think that's another place that often designers struggle with.
Yeah. And I think, again, I think we go back to that storytelling kind of piece of, yes, the company is talking about, our company, we're talking about GPU, we're talking about unit economics, all of this kind of like stuff and buzzwords. And yes, as design, we probably need to understand these. But also, I think as designers, we can then kind of work out how we can simplify some of this language so it's understandable, right? So yeah, I think it's kind of demystifying some of this language as designers and understanding it. I think one of the biggest things that what you could do to kind of get that more commercial lens is partner with product. If you partner with product, that way you don't necessarily have to understand all the lingo, be that translator. Products can help you do that and package it. And I think it goes back to kind of knowing as a designer where your strengths kind of lie. So partnering with product in that story kind of telling, working out with them around how you can prioritize, let's say, for example, features. So I'll give you a really good example. So with the opportunity solution tree, working with product to kind of build that out. But where design kind of comes in is bringing in those insights and that data and that user sentiment. So you're combining those opportunities from a product perspective with the users. And then together with product, you kind of create a story. And by its kind of design, opportunity solution tree automatically ladders up to those business kind of goals, because at the center is that business goal. So then you can kind of, with product, work out actually how you articulate that. Again, the good thing about the opportunity solution tree is it's quite visual, and it almost starts from that business goal through to that opportunity down to those experiments. And that's essentially like turns out to be your plan as a designer, right? That's your discovery plan. You've got some experiments that should be feasible if you've done it with engineers. And then you can go and kind of work out, well, what solutions do we do around that? So I think there's different tools that we can use as designers that help us translate some of this business kind of lingo, I say, or kind of these business goals to make them a little bit more attainable and a little bit more achievable. It's almost just breaking down what that goal is and what does that mean for your team. But a designer isn't alone, and it's not kind of like a lone kind of task.
Mm-hmm.
It's how do you leverage the other people in your team and the other skill sets in your kind of cross-functional team to help you achieve that.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit more about that partnership with product, right? I think in a lot of companies, it's a really strong partnership. And then there are definitely companies that we've talked to and worked with where it's a bit more adversary, right? That the overlap of some of the activities and research and understanding, it causes tension. So talk a little bit about in your career where you've seen and how you've helped to build up those partnerships and really how you help design maintain enough voice in those partnerships as well.
Yeah, good question. So I think I'm lucky enough to experience the product partnership at a kind of team level where I've been in a cross-functional team, but also at that leadership level. So I think one of the key things is just that human kind of relationship and just building that relationship in essence. I think the other part is really understanding your role. So working with product, whoever your product manager is, and doing a bit of kind of expectation setting and the roles and responsibilities. As a designer, like your role is to bring that user focus and that customer lens on whatever's happening in the team. And as a product perspective is like that business feasibility side of things, right? I think there are definitely activities that you can pair on. So previously when I worked at a startup called Eporta, me and the product manager were pairing on pretty much everything. But there were distinctive activities that a PM would kind of do, and I would leave them to that. So I think it's establishing that relationship, establishing a bit of a mutual respect for each other, but also knowing where to kind of step in and also where to step back. And I think that takes time. That takes time and takes investment. Like any kind of relationship, any kind of marriage or anything, it takes time and give and take and kind of working it out. At that leadership level, that's more of an interesting kind of tension, I would say. Whereas product is a lot more involved in a lot of the conversations. And I think from a design perspective, I definitely struggled with this. It's just like, okay, so where do I kind of fit in? Where does that user kind of fit in? Because I'm not testing designs and
Right.
design visibility. I'm looking at UX and design at that kind of strategic level. And I kind of realized through a lot of kind of, I guess, pains and struggles is it really does have an opportunity at that strategic side. So product will kind of work with that strategy. But actually from what UX can do is one, bring in those insights, those customer user insights, but two, visualize the vision. So you've got the vision, which is like words, blah, blah, blah. But actually, what does that look like from a visual perspective? And again, it's that role of a designer as a translator, where you almost translate that vision into a visual perspective. Like, how are we actually going to do this from a visual perspective? What does that mean from a user perspective? What do we need to shift in our journeys to meet that kind of vision? And that's where design sits in, right? So then you have a product strategy, which actually has the words and the kind of like the more kind of like the articulation, but then you've got a visual kind of backup of visually this is what this kind of translates. And then as a designer or a design leader, you can kind of use your team and mobilize your team to come up with a North Star. And almost you come up with that North Star, and then that turns out to be your roadmap, because then it's like, well, how do we kind of deliver this? How can we slice that up? So I think that's the role that design at that kind of leadership, more strategic level, is actually how do we visualize the mission and the vision? And I think especially even at that team level, you can do that as well. So you've got the mission and the vision of the team. Actually, how do I visualize this? What does it actually look like? because an engineer will need to kind of know, okay, right, this is great that we've got this mission and vision, but what does that actually mean? What does it mean for our users? So I think that's where design comes in.
Well, I think it's really, I think that's really astute that you kind of figured that out, because I think it gives something tangible at that strategic level that people associate with design. And I think sometimes that's the hard part. It design weaves through everything. But while that's really important, and we know that, it sometimes isn't as visible of what it is. And so this gives something to own. And I think it's good too, because I think both at the sort of individual level and at the leadership level, like as a product manager in my background, I can tell you this, like it's a lot of very type A personalities, right? And so they're forward and they're going and they're driving. Like that's what we want to do. We want to drive. And in that, unintentionally, I might say, but doesn't always feel that way. Like it can roll things over, and it can kind of take charge in a way that we feel is being helpful, but isn't always. And I think that is sometimes where the tension between individual product and design contributors comes in. Is it's just the sort of two different approaches, and one really doesn't feel like it gives space sometimes to the other. And so I think even on those individual levels, then having touchstones and things that product can see, right? Like it's helpful in their little minds going, trying to get to the end thing, to remember the value and the need to not really pause, but to bring those things in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's that bigger picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've always got the now, next, and future.
Yep.
But how can we kind of add a little bit of certainty to that future? How can we shape it? And especially when you start talking about like dual track discovery and delivery kind of happening, a designer really has the opportunity to be able to shape and come up with a conceptual future. Like, this is what we think the future is. And then when they're validating other kind of designs in that now and next kind of space, they can almost start validating that longer form concept to bring a bit more clarity to the future and almost to shape things. But also when you're talking about engineering and architecture, it helps shape that as well. Because if you are able to say to the architecture and to engineers, okay, this is how I see it kind of shaping. This is the reason why I've designed this like this, is because this is eventually where we're going to go. And having something visual and tangible, like you said, really helps that conversation, and really helps that conversation with stakeholders as well. Like if you're talking to stakeholders about, this is how we think that this product should be shaped in the future, we're trying to gain some kind of certainty, but this is the rough kind of shape. And this is what the experience kind of looks like for our users. And here's some, by the way, here's some insights of where we've tested it. That gives levels of kind of certainty, but it also helps shape the future and helps people visualize like what is this product going to kind of look like. So I think there's real opportunities for designers to kind of take things and own. There's always like this ownership kind of struggle, I think. And I think it's really that visual lens and that customer lens that designers can start doing with that a product manager, quite frankly, probably can't do. Otherwise, doesn't have the ability to kind of do some of these things.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Okay, so one of the other things that we talk about, it's a little bit of a change, but I think this is a really important topic about, what makes design so powerful is the bringing in so many voices, right? The diversifying of making sure like design, what we do is we bring the point of view of the market. To do that effectively, we also need to make sure that as designers, we have diversity of our own lenses. And I know this is an area that you're very passionate about. And I think it's one where it's really important and everybody can do better. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about that in terms of why it is so critical and what are things that you do and that others can do to make sure that we're continuing to bring a diversification of voices in.
Yeah, great. I'm so passionate about this topic. I think, why is it important? I think ultimately as designers, as product designers, as we're designing products, especially more commercial, consumer-driven products, we're designing for everyone. A lot of the time we're designing for everyone. And we need that diversity of voices. We need that in engineering, we need it in product, and we need it in design, just because we're designing for loads of different people. I think we're at a turning point within design where you've got invisibility of interfaces. So you've got kind of voice happening, you've got kind of content is being designed, but who is designing some of these things? Who's baking in those rules? And we need to make sure that the people that are making those rules are from diverse kind of backgrounds and voices, rather than just one kind of singular voice or one kind of background, because that's not how it works. Like, humanity is rich and diverse. So it's kind of like how one of the things that I'm kind of consciously always kind of thinking about is, how can I diversify those kind of voices? How can I bring in diversity within my team, but also in the existing team, how can we be empathetic to other voices, right? How do we ensure that we're empathetic to other voices? So I think it's quite an interesting topic. I think one of the things is really just making sure, from the key bit is hiring, and ensuring at that hiring kind of level that we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. I think it's quite difficult. No one ever talks about this, but it's quite difficult with portfolios. So you could do a blind CV, but we still need to look at as design leaders, you still need to look at portfolios, which has probably got the person's name, they've got a picture, they've got all this other stuff. So you probably can infer a lot around that. So what I kind of try and do is ensure that in that kind of recruitment process, that we are kind of advertising it in many places, as many kind of accessible places as possible, so that we get as wide as possible range of applicants coming in. I'm always kind of looking at the applicant. There's only so much I can do, but I'm always looking at the applicants to make sure that we're getting a balanced amount of male versus female, making sure that we're shortlisting male versus female. I think for me, I am, rightly or wrongly, a little bit more lenient on some other people that might be from diverse backgrounds, purely because they might not have things like the network, or they might not have gone to like a prestigious kind of school. So I really do want to kind of, I look less around the background of someone on their CV and more around the talent and the quality of their portfolio. I think what's important to me as a design leader and someone who builds teams is really that thinking, and how they kind of think, and how they're able to apply that design thinking. I think also what I look for is culture ads, not fit. So one of my mentors kind of talks about this, like culture ads, not culture fit, because we're not a cult. We want people to kind of add to that culture and evolve that kind of culture. And I think the other thing is company policy. How can we create a company policy, or ensure that our company policies are appealing to as many people as possible? So that is hybrid kind of working styles to help people with families, or people who are neurodivergent, who like an office kind of, culture isn't really for them. I think also other things like meeting culture is a classic one. So ensuring that people are always using the hand up in meetings, ensuring that people are not talking over each other. There's all these little things that I think day to day we can do to ensure that we have like an inclusive kind of culture to people that are from minority and diverse kind of backgrounds in the workplace who are there. But also something that I'm passionate about is like, how do we then get people into that workplace from diverse kind of backgrounds, and also retain them is the kind of the key piece, is how do you then retain those people and ensure that they kind of move through the ranks of leadership, or through that career kind of path. I think a lot of why I do what I do is, and why I'm talking to people like yourself and why I write on my blog, is basically to really diversify and give another perspective of a design leader. I think a lot of design leaders are very samey. I'm going to say it, white, male, and bald for some reason. Always bald. And I just want to hear something different, a perspective of a different leader. Someone who, I haven't gone to a prestigious kind of school. A lot of what I've kind of learned just by trying different things and coming up with hacks. So I really want to kind of give those hacks and pass those hacks on to other people who are in design, or thinking about design, or wanting to be a design leader, who doesn't necessarily have the network or the sponsors, or knows that you need to get, someone to mentor you to kind of move through the ranks. Or how do you kind of do that? How do you approach that when you don't have a network? So all of those little hacks I like to kind of give freely to people from minority and diverse kind of backgrounds. So that's kind of why I'm on a bit of a mission at the moment to kind of just really talk about different design stories and talk about my background and where I'm from, and, just give color to the world of creativity, because we are all different. We are from different backgrounds. And actually, that when we go back to that storytelling piece, we need to hear stories from different people, because there isn't just one way to get into design.
Well, I think it's both as a leader and someone hiring, recognizing that if you want something different, you may have to look in different places, or not expect, you can't want different, but want it to have the same background or the same things, right? So there's that. But also I think it's empowering and letting people from different backgrounds know that you should still apply. There was a research that came out just how less likely women and people of color were to apply for jobs if they didn't check all the boxes.
Oh,
That
yeah.
we would self go, you know what? I don't do that. I probably shouldn't apply. Whereas others would just go ahead and apply. And even that feeling like you can't because it's different is something that I think is really empowering when you recognize that, yes, you can. Nobody
Yeah.
has them all.
Exactly, 100%. One, you have nothing to lose.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too.
And I think there is something about taking some of the principles of how a man or a white male will approach things and just be more. I've started adopting this, being a little bit more white male, like less about. And I think as women, as like people from diverse backgrounds, you second guess yourself. You always think, oh, but what about my background? What about this? But actually, if you just don't think about it, just apply, just go for it. Like what our male counterparts kind of do. They just kind of go for it. They're like, probably see 2 bullet points, I match. Let me just send my CV. Just having the more of that mentality rather than thinking about the negative. Because I think a lot of us, and I struggled with this a lot when I was kind of a young designer. I still kind of struggle with it. It's just like you spend a lot of time just thinking about the negative aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
When actually all that time and energy, you could have just sent your CV.
Yep.
So yeah, and I think maybe you might not get that role, but actually you've opened up a network, or you've met some people that you might not have met and you're on their radar. So I think a lot of the time we don't think about the doors that we possibly could open. We're just thinking about that job and will we get the job, or will we get the interview, rather than actually the doors that it could possibly open for us, or the network that it could build. So I think that's key in just thinking about these opportunities. Just go for it. Just don't think about it. You've got nothing to lose.
This is actually one of the places where I think design is something that the portfolio comes to advantage, because as someone who hires, right, creative people, like it speaks volumes to me what your portfolio looks like. And your experience is interesting, but your portfolio is, to me, where I can see how you think and how you create. So that's another reason that you should go ahead and apply, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it goes back again to that storytelling piece.
Yep.
Like if you can tell really compelling stories, if you can demonstrate how you think about design and your design kind of process. Like for me, when I'm hiring, I almost don't care about the CV. Like the
No, exactly.
And how you tell the stories and how you can articulate those are probably like the key thing as a designer.
The thought process that brought you to the design is, to me, the most interesting part, even more so than the final execution. Talk to me about how the decisions you made and what you did along the way.
Yeah, 100%.
We have a really good art director who that's one of his like special gifts, right? Because every time you'd be like, I really like that design. And you also know there's like 17 layers behind it. And every time I'm like, oh, that's great. I love that. All right. Oh gosh, we talked about a lot of different things today. If you were going to have people do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
Oh, good question. I think I would say to designers to think about how you can leverage some of the relationships that you have amongst you, whether that's in a cross-functional team or whether that's just your network in general. And I would also say, think about what makes you special as a designer and how you can kind of leverage that everywhere, basically. I think those are the two takeaways.
Excellent advice. All right, Vanessa, I know you're really, really passionate about these topics. If people wanted to follow you more or learn more from you, where should I send them?
So I have a blog which I write about different kind of topics around leadership and design. So that's venessabennett.com. Shall I spell it?
Yes, go for it.
My name is, so it's VENESSABENNETT.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. If you just search my name, and you'll find me on LinkedIn, and I will happily have a coffee chat about any of these topics, but also about design because I'm super passionate about it. So yeah, those are probably the two places.
Excellent. All right, Venessa, it has been wonderful talking with you today. And thank you for coming in and sharing your story and your perspectives here at Design Chats.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
All right, that does it today's episode. For design teams looking to contribute strategically, drive value, and build influence in their organizations, explore our training offerings at pragmaticinstitute.com/design. And don't forget to check out venessabennett.com. Thanks.